Clover lawns are trendy now, but today I want to answer the question, can you eat them? And whether you have a full clover yard or just little patches, you have likely seen these beautiful wildflowers before. So back to my original question. And the answer is yes. Actually, there are several parts of clover that can be eaten, and honestly, I was surprised by how good that some of them were. What's up, everyone? My name is Jesse, and you are watching Feral Foraging. And you guys, I was not expecting how much I was going to be drawn down the rabbit hole for doing this video. I mean, it's clover, it's a very common plant, right? I wasn't expecting that I would have to do research on things like cyanide, on a group of chemicals called isoflavones, because as it turns out, the consumption of clover is actually somewhat controversial. So I'm going to address all of it. Plus, I'll go over the normal stuff like how I gather and prepare it to eat, as well as how to identify it and distinguish it from common lookalikes, some of which can grow right next to it. The clover that we are looking at today specifically is white clover, as it is by far the most common and available, but I will also be talking about red clover as well. It's worth noting that in North America, this is a non-native plant. Personally though, I wouldn't really consider it a truly noxious invasive. You don't really see it outcompeting native plants too much, and if it were between this and another non-native fescue grass lawn, then I would take the clover every single time. Especially because there's also research out of the University of Minnesota which found that white clover are actually visited by a significant number of bumblebees and other native bees. You should also know that there are some amazing edible native North American clovers that should be promoted as well, like purple prairie clover, but we will save that for a future video. Believe it or not, but both the leaves and the flowers of clover are edible. Gathering the plant parts could not be easier. I simply pluck the flowers and the tops of the leaves and put them into a basket. Large patches of them with longer stems can make gathering easier because you don't get as much of other plants kind of wrapped up with everything else. Because they do often grow so low to the ground though, I will always give them a quick rinse and wash them in water before I use them for anything else. One of the first things that people often think about with spring greens like clover is to make a wild salad. I'll be honest, I was surprised by how much I enjoyed the flavor of clover leaves. It's somewhat sweet with a faint green bean flavor, which makes sense as it is a legume after all. That being said, the texture of the leaves, at least when I got them, was a little bit tough. The same goes for eating the flowers raw. As a garnish, on top of a salad base like wild lettuce or something else, I think it would totally be fine, but to use this whole thing as the base may not taste that good, and there could be other reasons to not do that as well that we'll look at in a second. Then I try to blanch the leaves, as I do with many of the wild greens that I harvest, and this did improve the texture a bit, but still the ones I was getting, the older leaves, were a little bit on the tough side. I imagine this could be a pretty good use with younger, more tender leaves though. I think that using clover kind of as a component of a greater meal, like we would adding it into a green wild soup, which would be blended up, or to use as an ingredient in a recipe like Forager Chef's green burger patties, would be something that would work quite well for them. So was there any preparation that I tried that I really liked with clover? Yes, there was. Actually, I quite enjoyed making tea with it, but I have a little twist on that I want to show you. First, what we need to do when preparing the plant parts for tea is to dry them or dehydrate them. This will vastly improve the flavor, and it allows you to store them long term as well. I initially used the blossoms for this, and I steeped them for about 10 to 20 minutes in hot water. I wouldn't use completely boiling water, as I found this made the tea a little bit on the astringent side, but adding in honey or a sweetener helps to cut that down quite a bit. But one more thing that I want to tell you about that really leveled up the taste of the tea that I wasn't expecting was additionally adding in leaves when making the tea, the dried leaves. Surprisingly, it's almost as if the leaves carry an even sweeter flavor than the flowers themselves. You can have this tea hot, but I also really liked turning it into an iced tea. A sweet, floral, refreshing beverage to enjoy just as the weather starts to get a bit warmer. Seriously, you have to try this, and the great thing is that just about everyone can, as the plant is so common. I also saw mention of the dehydrated leaves imparting a vanilla flavor in baked goods. I didn't quite find them to have that strong of hints of vanilla, but I'm also not a baker or really good with the flavor side of things, so JB, if you are watching this, maybe you can figure out this one for all of us. JB has these really cool flavor sections in his newsletter, The Wild Grocery, and I'll keep all of you updated with posts in the community tab, which is a great place for all of us to hang out in between videos. So now that you are excited about using white clover, let's talk about positively identifying it, and some things that you could mistake it for. Clover has what are called trifoliate compound leaves, which just means that it has leaves with 3 individual leaflets. So right now, what you see me holding, which looks like 3 leaves, is actually 1 single leaf with 3 leaflets. And those leaflets have a slightly jagged edge and a very shallow notch at the end when looked at closely. They also often have light variegation that forms something of a triangle between all of the leaflets. Clover, in addition to the compound leaves, has compound flowers, and here is where we get a better glimpse of why it is a nitrogen fixer. When we zoom way in on an individual flower, we can see that they bear remarkable resemblance to the flowers of a pea or a bean plant, and that's because these are all members of the legume family, which are often nitrogen fixers. Both of the lookalikes that I'm going to show you also have trifoliate leaves. The first one is called black medic, Medicago lupulina, which has stems that are far hairier and much smaller yellow flowers. This one is also in the legume family. The next one is very common and people mistake it for clover all the time. I can't tell you how many articles that I see that are about clover that have this in the picture. The easiest way to tell the difference is by looking at the leaflets, which of the lookalike have not shallow, but deep notches at the top, creating a distinct heart shape to them. It is called wood sorrel in the genus Oxalis, and it is edible as well with a really delicious sour flavor. We should probably do a video about this one as well. Let me know if you guys would like to see that. Another cool thing about white clover is that they essentially flower year-round and can be gathered for a very long time. This makes it easy to spot whenever you want to look for it. For other amazing wild food species like pawpaw, wild plum, or elderberry, this is not the case. The flowering and the harvesting window can be pretty thin, and that is exactly why I created my interactive Forager's calendar just for you, so you will always know exactly when to be on the lookout for these amazing edible species. Okay, I have one more plant that I want to tell you about that blooms around the same time as white clover, but first, we need to address a few concerns about the consumption of clover. First, we will talk about white clover potentially containing cyanide. Yes, cyanide. White clover has some very peculiar genetics, which means that some plants do and others don't produce cyanide. Unfortunately, there is not a great way to tell which is which without using something like test strips or having a lab analysis done. But even then, to me, this isn't a major concern. Why? Well, first, cyanide has a very low boiling point. So if you're making any of the cooked preparations that I've shown you, likely most of it will be gone, just evaporated off. In addition, based on the various studies that I've seen, you would need to consume a very significant amount of raw clover for this to be a major issue. Where you do see it pop up as an issue is with cattle that are consuming a huge amount of clover in their diet. If you do still find yourself a little bit worried about this though, here's one indicator that you can use. The compounds in clover that break down into cyanide are known to be very bitter. So if you ever happen to taste clover that's exceedingly bitter, spit that one out and then refrain from gathering clover from that particular location in the future. The second concern is the content of a group of chemicals called isoflavones, which you may know as phytoestrogens. These are chemicals that are similar to our own hormonal estrogen that our bodies produce. Now you might be wondering, especially men, is that bad? Is this going to be harmful to hormonal health? So right now, the scientific community is really duking it out over this topic. You will see some studies that say totally fine, nothing to worry about, and others that say it is definitely not fine. So me personally, as a man, I am cautious of this one. But here's the thing. If you are eating lots of ultra-processed foods, you are eating a lot of soy, which is very high in phytoestrogens. What this all boils down to me, is that I wouldn't make clover like a staple of your diet or anything like that, but the tiny amount that you'd be getting would be like a drop in the bucket compared to the amount you'd be getting with any products that contain soy. However, for women, there is evidence to suggest that the consumption of clover can actually be quite beneficial. When we look at the ethnobotanical history of clover, now including red clover as well, we see numerous references to it being consumed in both a medicinal context and as a food, which makes me feel very comfortable presenting these uses to you today. To me, clover is an amazing edible wild plant that I think can be a fantastic introduction to the world of foraging for so many people. And I hope that it brings you a little closer to nature as well. Alright, that last plant that I want to show you, it actually isn't a lookalike for clover at all, but another common yard wildflower that makes a really amazing tea. This one is almost completely overlooked. I love it so much that I made a whole video about it that you can watch right here. I really think you're going to like this one, and I hope to see you there.